As you know, the International Space Station is the largest and most complex project in the history of mankind. And we want to point out to the students right now that the long panels on either side of the space station are actually solar panels. What they do is they grab energy from the sun and turn it into electricity to power the 6 laboratories on board the ISS. In those labs, life-altering experiments are taking place. For example, crew members oversee the growth of protein crystals. More pure protein grows in space than on Earth. Studying protein helps scientists better understand proteins in viruses, and that leads to better drugs for treating disease. Studies are also happening on humans living with no gravity. Living in space can weaken an astronaut's muscles, change how his heart arteries and veins work, and causes bone loss. Scientists are also studying how plants grow with no gravity. So there's quite a bit that we're really looking at in those experiments on the ISS. Now, you have overseen some of those experiments. Is that true? You've actually seen some of them, Lynn?
Yes. Our program is very much aimed at how do we live and work in space. If we're going to go beyond the space station, back to the moon, and someday on to Mars, we need to know how to survive in that environment. And there are many things that you pointed out that happen to the body, and so our experiments are very much focused on how can we grow food if we need it in the future to travel with us, and how do we prevent some of those negative things that happen to the body or counteract them when we go into space flight.
And the current inhabitants of the ISS really oversee those experiments. They have to be very accomplished men, and the 2 crew members on board the ISS are William Mcarthur and Valeri Tokarev. Here is a little background on the crew members of the ISS.
Bill Macarthur was born in 1951 in Laurinburg, North Carolina.
Always this boyhood interest in flying. I built rockets when I was a kid and flew those, flew model airplanes.
As a young man, he gained admission to West Point and began flying helicopters for the Army near the end of the Vietnam conflict. He earned a master's degree in aerospace engineering and was assigned by the Army to the Johnson Space Center. He became an astronaut in 1990 and made his first space flight in 1993. MacArthur's crewmate for this 6-month mission is Valeri Tokarev. He was born in 1952 in the small Russian village of Kapyar.
I went to the library in our small village and read whole books about military pilots Second World War. It was serious impact to my mental, and I just wanted to be like them, like a that pilot.
Tokarev won admission to the military fighter pilot school in Stavropol and then entered the Russian Air Force. In 1987, he was picked as a cosmonaut for the former Soviet Union shuttle program. His first spaceflight was in 1999 on the shuttle Discovery. Macarthur and Tokarev bring 45 days' experience on orbit to their first long-duration space mission.
Now, one of those crew members, as we just mentioned, is American, and one is from the Soviet Union. Lynn, I'm wondering, how do they communicate with each other, and what language do they use?
Well, the principal language for the International Space Station is English, but all of our American astronauts learn Russian. And so I would say that typically they're probably going back and forth between the 2.
And they're up there together for 6 months, so
That's
they really
right.
have to share and share alike, don't they?
Yes, it's very important when we select a crew that they're compatible people.
All right. Now, we know, Lynn, that the topic of communication is on the minds of some of our students today. They're going to be asking questions about communication to the crew members. And right now, we're going to go back to Matt Fetters live and talk about that. Matt?
Well, Kate, first I'm going to have to use my golf voice a little bit here because the program has started behind me. But as far as the way they're going to communicate today, some of the students are going to ask their questions in English, some are going to ask in Russian. And the cosmonaut Tokarev will answer in Russian. We will then hear a NASA translator speaking in English, so we'll be able to hear his answer in English and we'll all understand him perfectly clear. Speaking of the questions that they're going to ask, we had an opportunity this week to talk to one of the teachers here at Thomas Jefferson, and she told us what they're going to ask these guys up there in space. Let's take a look at that videotape now.
I think the students are going to be asking not only the science and technology of the space program and some of the questions they're interested in, how things work and how things are conducted aboard the station, but also political questions, medical questions, cultural questions. And these are all things that as a spacefaring world, we're going to have to be able to use these skills in a cooperative nature. No one nation can do it alone. This gives us an opportunity to see space science and space travel as a vehicle. It's a vehicle for writing, it's a vehicle for math, it's a vehicle for government and politics, it's a vehicle to spark the imagination.
Communication is a big issue on the ISS. Right now, the United States Secretary of Education, Margaret Spellings, is at the podium to address students at Thomas Jefferson High School. Let's listen in on what she's saying.
I want to also recognize our friends from across the pond over at the Undell School in England who are joining us today. Thank you all. Students from TJ will be in a separate room on a video connection, but we're very glad to have them with us. During International Education Week, I can't think of a better place to be than with you all and celebrating the International Space Station. Here at TJ, math and science are way cool, as my 8th grader would say, and you all have very cool futures ahead of you, no doubt about that. Can you all hear us?
We have you loud and clear.
Thank you very much. Well, it's great to be with you all, Bill, Valeri, and Carl, of course. I know you all were with Paul McCartney the other day. We don't have any rock stars down here, but we've got some academic stars who want to ask you all some questions.
Hi, I'm Jennifer, and this question's for Bill. How has your military background and training affected your experiences aboard the ISS?
That's a question we hear often in the astronaut office, as in the cosmonaut corps. About half the members are military or former military, and the other half come from civilian endeavors, engineering, science, math, teaching. And so each of our experiences, our backgrounds, brings something unique and something of value into the whole process. From a military background, we come in very, very mission-oriented, really focused on the goal with a lot of operational experience. And I think that's something that contributes very positively to executing space flights.
We've been listening to a live call from Thomas Jefferson High School in Virginia to the International Space Station, about 230 miles up in our Earth's atmosphere. With us right now is Lynn Klein with NASA. And Lynn, you've seen calls placed all around the world by our two crew members. Would you consider this a successful call?
I think it was successful, and I was impressed with the sophistication of the questions from these students. The fact that they ranged across operations on station, science experiments, and even some policy questions.
Mm-hmm. And some of the questions were in Russian.
Yes.
Our two crew members, Valeri Tokarev and William Macarthur, really had some inspiring words at the end, and they seemed delighted in taking many of those questions. Did you think they looked well?
Yes, I think they did.
And what did you think about the operation? Did everything look normal?
Yes, it did, and I noticed there was a pen that floated through the scene twice, so that gives you a little sense of what it's like to be living on orbit, where if you don't attach it with Velcro or tether it, it's free floating.
Right. Well, we just touched on it briefly, but the International Space Station has been up in space for 5 years. It's an anniversary of sorts, and we're going to talk about that. But first, we're going to go back to Matt Fetters, who is live at Thomas Jefferson High School, to get the reaction from him and the students and on the call. And a very special guest you have, Matt.
I am joined by Cindy Macarthur, wife of astronaut Bill Macarthur. Well, how'd he look?
He looked great. It's always good to see him. I get to see him once a week on a video conference like this, but I'll tell you the truth, there's a lot of pressure when I'm coordinating the event and he's answering the questions. He better do a good job.
You get to talk to him once a week. How else do you communicate him with him? Well, he's up there for 6 months.
He's up there for 6 months. He's about a month into that 6-month stay. We get to talk on the telephone. There's an IP phone that's available on orbit, and he can call once a day on that. Never know when he's going to call, and I have to admit, sometimes I'm busy when he calls, and I get a voicemail from space. We also exchange email on a regular basis, and then in addition, we have a video conference every Sunday, so we get to talk to him that way too. So not a bad situation.
So, as we said, gone for 6 months and way out there in space, you got to be worried a little bit.
You know, people ask that all the time, and I think that I would have been saddest and most worried if he hadn't gotten to go. I'm privileged to work at NASA, and when you work at NASA, what you realize is that there are a lot of really smart people who take great care of him. And so, believe it or not, worry is minimal. I just want him to have a good time and have a successful flight.